Okay, thanks. So, yeah, we are recording. Brilliant. So let's get started. Firstly, thank you everybody for joining us for this webinar on the new graduate route visa. If you're in the UK, you'll know that it's actually started to get quite nice and warm and sunny. So I hope that hasn't impacted our numbers. But everybody who's registered will receive a copy of the PowerPoint slides. So just as a quick introduction, we will both be introducing ourselves in more detail, but Talitha is an associate partner at Spencer West, and she's going to be covering the rules, the requirements, eligibility for the new graduate route visa. Okay, and there will be a lot of kind of detailed information. She's covered all of this in her slides. Many of you are going to have lots and lots of questions. What we ask is that if it's very specific questions to your individual situation, it's probably better to have a consultation with Talitha. And we'll talk about how you can book one of these consultations in towards the end of the webinar. So after she covers the rules and requirements, I will then talk about the impact of the new graduate route visa on your career, on your future. What does it really mean? You know, if you're a student in the UK, you've come to study here, chances are pretty high that you want to work here afterwards. So what exactly does this graduate route visa mean for your career? So that's it, let's get started. If you have questions, please put them in the Q&A box, which is just at the bottom, should be at the bottom of your screen. I can see some people have typed into the chat. Musa, hi. I can see some people have typed into the chat, which is absolutely fine. But for specific questions, please do use the Q&A box, because we are hoping to carve out some time at the end for your questions. That's it from me. Talitha, I will pass over to you. I've made you a co-host, so I think you should be able to move to the next slide. If not, let me know and I will do that for you. Yeah.
No, it doesn't look like I can.
Okay. Just let me know when you want me to move on to the next slide.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah. Thanks for that. Hi, everyone, and welcome to this webinar. Got loads to get through to today, so I will try and be as quick as I can, because I know loads of people are going to have questions, so we do want to keep quite a bit of time at the end for that. So what I'll be going through, I'll give a short overview of the graduate route. I'll go through the requirements that need to be met by an applicant. I'll speak briefly about dependents, and then also I'll speak about the period that's granted to a graduate applicant, and then the conditions attached to that leave. Next slide, please.
Oh, I love it. Talitha, you was going through this quickly.
Yeah, thanks. So the graduate route. The graduate route is a new route for international students who have successfully completed an eligible course as a student at a student sponsor, which is a higher education provider with a track record of compliance. Applications must be made in the UK, and the applicant must have current permission as a student or Tier 4 migrant in order to be eligible to apply. The graduate visa route opens to applications on the 1st of July 2021, so not that long left. The route's not eligible for settlement, so and it's also not extendable. However, if an applicant is on the graduate route, they can potentially switch in country to a different visa immigration category prior to the expiry of their visa. So I've given one example on the slide, which is the skilled worker route. So if the graduate applicant was able to get a UK job offer, which is eligible for sponsorship, they could then switch into that route. It should be noted that any time spent on the graduate route will not count towards settlement, even if you were to go into the skilled worker route, for example. So essentially just starting your clock again. Next slide, please. So the requirements. The first requirement is validation. So in order for the application to be valid, it must be made in the UK and online. Applicants must have or have last had permission as a student or Tier 4 migrant. And the applicant must pay the application fee, which will be £700. And the immigration health surcharge, which will be 624 per year of grant. We were hoping that graduates would get the reduced rate that students do, but unfortunately not. So they'll have to pay the normal rate, which most migrants do, which is 624. The applicant will also, back again. Yeah. The applicant will also need to provide biometrics. This will be slightly different than usual because the route will be fully digital. So the applicant won't need to attend a visa application centre in order to provide their biometrics, as the Home Office will reuse biometrics that the student would have given in their student application. So the applicant would use the chip checker process, which will enable them to upload their biometrics residence permit and a photo in order for the application to be processed. And then obviously you need to provide a valid passport or travel document to establish identity and nationality. Suitability. So the when assessing an application, the Home Office will look at an applicant's conduct and behaviour. So they would look to see if they have any criminal convictions, any adverse immigration history, such as overstaying. And if they do, then in most cases, it would make the applicant ineligible to be granted a visa on the graduate route. And the applicant shouldn't be on immigration bail when making this application. Next slide, please. Yeah. So eligibility, this is probably the bigger chunk of the route, as we would need to go through the three main criterias that sum up the eligibility criteria. So the applicant must be awarded 70 points, and that's basically put into like three categories, which are on the slide. So you've got successful completion requirement, qualification requirement, and study in the UK requirement. So in the forthcoming slides, I will be going through each requirement and explaining how they need to be met. Be happy to know that there's no maintenance requirement or English language requirement, which is great, as the student would have already evidenced this when making their application. So you don't need to evidence that again, which will speed up the process. Next slide, please. Okay, so the first eligibility criteria is the successful completion requirement. So this is where the applicant must have last been sponsored by a student sponsor, which has is a higher education provider with a track record of compliance on the date of application. They must have successfully completed the course of study which was undertaken during their last permission as a student. And the university must have notified the Home Office by the date of the application that the applicant has successfully completed that course. So by evidencing all of this 3 bullet points, you would successfully meet the successful completion requirement. Next slide, please. So the second eligibility criteria is the qualification requirement. And this is where the applicant establishes that they have successfully completed a course of study which they have or will be awarded either a UK bachelor's degree, postgraduate degree, or a successfully completed relevant qualification. So what is a relevant qualification? On my next slide, I have listed all the courses that fall under that definition. Next slide, please. Yeah, so if a student has studied and successfully completed any of the following courses on this slide, they would then meet the definition of relevant qualification. So I can just leave that on there for a little second, just so you can see which courses they are. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, and the third eligibility requirement is study in the UK requirement. So the applicant must have studied in the UK for a minimum period of the course for which they were here as a student. So from the table on the slides, you'll see that if the student has enrolled in a course which is for 12 months or less, they would need to be in the UK for the full duration of the course in order to meet this requirement. Or if the student had enrolled in a course that was longer than 12 months, they would have needed to be in the UK for at least 12 months. And that's usually the last 12 months of the course, so in most cases a degree, in order to meet this requirement. However, due to the current pandemic, last year and this year, students have found it difficult to come to the UK, mainly because of travel restrictions and so forth. And therefore not all students would meet this requirement because they've undertaken distance learning. So the Home Office have put a concession in place for students that have been affected by the pandemic. So could I have the next slide, please? So this outlines the concession for students that have not yet come to the UK and have been undertaking distance learning. So firstly, if the course that you were enrolled on was for longer than 12 months, the Home Office have now permitted distance learning as long as it took place between the 24th of January 2020 and the 27th of September 2021. The courses that were 12 months or less, if you remember from my previous slide, these students would have needed to be in the UK for the full duration of their course. However, if they weren't able to do that, then they could potentially fall under the following. So if they began their course in 2020 via distance learning and have not yet entered the UK, they have until the 21st of June 2021 to arrive in the UK to complete that course. 21st of June is fast approaching, and I know some students are still struggling to arrive in the UK due to the pandemic and travel restrictions. The Home Office haven't given any information about whether they'll be extending this date for students, but we do hope that they do that because there's going to be a lot of students that wouldn't be able to get in by this date. So if the students started their course in 2021 by distance learning and have not yet entered the UK, they have until the 27th of September 2021 to arrive in the UK and complete their course. And courses that began in 2020 or 2021 and the student already had existing leave and had already travelled to the UK as a student, they then need to be present back in the UK before that visa expires in order to meet the study in the UK eligibility criteria. Next slide, please. Thank you. So now we're on to dependents. So dependent family members are permitted if they are already in the UK with you and were granted permission as your dependent whilst you were a student. So unfortunately, no new dependents are permitted, except for children born in the UK as once you held student leave or graduate permission. So anyone wanting to bring over their spouse or partner once they're on the graduate route wouldn't be able to do so unless they were already their dependent whilst they were a student. Next slide, please. So the period that's granted once you've made a successful graduate application. So if you've studied a course which is a PhD or other doctoral qualification, you'll be granted 3 years to remain in the UK. And all other qualifications, such as a degree, you'll be given 2 years to remain in the UK. Next slide, please. So once you've got the leave, as all immigration routes, there are some restrictions on the migrants. So on this slide, I've outlined the restrictions that would apply to a graduate applicant who successfully had their application approved. They would have no recourse to public funds. They would be able to work, which is the main advantage, which includes self-employment and voluntary work. And the only work they wouldn't be able to do is to work as a professional sports person. The applicant is able to study, however, if it's studied with a student sponsor that would meet the approved qualification and level of study requirements of the student route, then they wouldn't be able to do that, because essentially you would have to use the student route if you wanted to take substantial study. And certain nationalities will be required to register with the police, but obviously if you have a successful application, this should usually be outlined in your approval letter, so you should know whether you need to do this or not, because it's only certain nationalities. And next slide. Yep. So there's a lot to get through there. I've kept it really short and sweet because, like I said, we do want to keep a lot of time for questions. So feel free to put your questions in the question box. And yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Talitha. That was a really good effort. You got through so much detail there, so that was absolutely brilliant. We have questions that have come through. Please try and put them in the Q&A box. We are going to check the chat as well, but Talitha, if you want to have a look through those now, because I think some of them you'd be probably able to answer, so we can go through the answers at the end.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay, so hi everyone. This is my kind of opportunity to introduce myself in a bit more detail. So I'm Annika Awasthi, and I'm the founder of Grad Careers Coach. And we're an organisation that helps international students to secure top graduate jobs with visa sponsorship in the UK. And that's quite key. That's the only thing we focus on here at Grad Careers Coach. So it's long-term permanent jobs with visa sponsorship. And we've been doing this over the last 5 years, and we focus on specific industries such as professional services, investment banking, engineering, and technology. So I'm here to give a slightly different perspective on the new graduate route visa. Yes, it is super exciting. And when it was introduced by the UK government, I thought, this is brilliant. Okay, this is absolutely going to change the way international students, experience post-study life. And there's a lot of advantages, really some obvious ones. But I also want to talk about some of the cons as well, some of the disadvantages. I think it's really important to, I'm sorry, I'm just having a look at the chat, just checking everybody can hear me fine, that's fine. I think it's important to look at it on balance. Okay, so that's what I'm going to be covering today. So during the course of Talitha's slides, she outlined the eligibility criteria, the requirements, and you may be following it thinking, great, tick, 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 I fulfill those requirements, I'm definitely going to be eligible. And that is really, really good news. But what I would like you to consider today is, what does it really mean for you to get the graduate route visa to get the 2-year visa extension. So let's start with the pros, so the advantages of being able to stay in the UK for 2 years after graduating. The most obvious advantage is that you're going to have more time and more flexibility as well. So if we compare the current situation where most international students have just a few months after graduating to look for a job, to figure out what their next steps are, it's very, very tight and it's intense, and it leads to a lot of pressure, a lot of stress, a lot of visa anxiety. It can also mean that you miss out on grad schemes, because often international students that kind of we speak to anyway, they don't realise how early on you need to apply for these grad schemes. And if you're, especially if you're a master's student, you've just got to the UK, you're kind of just getting settled into your accommodation, figuring out your course, your timetable, you focus mainly on your studies, and you think, oh, I'll worry about job applications after I graduate, after I finish my studies. But by that time, unfortunately, a lot of those graduate schemes, graduate jobs have already been filled, okay? And lots of international students realise this too late. So the new graduate route visa will really help with that. It will really relieve some of that pressure. And it will mean you don't have to necessarily juggle your studies, which can be, you know, very, very intensive and time consuming, with job applications. So that's a huge advantage. Following on from that point, there's a positive impact on master's students, because often master's students, at the moment their visa expires at a bit of an unusual time. So for example, many master's students' visas expires in January, and there are limited graduate jobs and graduate schemes with a January start date. So what that means is master's students miss out on some of these top opportunities just because of when their visa expires. But with the introduction of the new graduate route visa, you're not going to have that issue. You are going to be able to have that extra time and apply to those schemes, okay? And to start in September, which is kind of a more usual graduate job start date. If that's not clear and you're sitting there and you're not quite sure the point around the dates, just type into the Q&A box and I can elaborate on that. Okay, the second pro is a second chance. And this is especially true if you've already applied to some of your dream companies, your dream graduate schemes, but for whatever reason, you haven't been successful in those applications. And in the UK, often you cannot reapply to those same grad schemes until 6 or 12 months later, okay? So having the graduate route visa gives you the opportunity for a second chance. So you could have applied, you know, in one academic year, not have been successful, and that doesn't mean that door is closed. It means you can apply for your dream companies again in the next academic year, the next recruitment cycle. And then, of course, a huge advantage is the opportunity that you have for work experience. You are going to be much more likely to secure work experience, internships, you know, like I mentioned, voluntary work, placement years, instead of just the few months post-graduation, which is what you have now. You're going to have 2 years as a chance for you to gain work experience. And UK-based work experience is going to be fantastic. It will boost your CV. It will boost your career prospects wherever you decide to work. So this is really, really good. And obviously you don't need a work visa as well for this. So lots of flexibility. Now to the cons, which I don't think many international students think about, but it's important to. So the first con, or the first disadvantage, it is a short-term visa with a deadline. It's a fixed 2-year period. You cannot extend post the 2 years. Talitha, correct me if I'm wrong, but it is a fixed 2-year period. And you want to make sure that you're not caught out, okay? So how you spend those 2 years is going to be critical. It's very easy to waste that time. Very, very, very easy to waste it, because you may think there's no pressure. I've got this visa. I can work wherever I want. I don't need somebody to sponsor me. So you may decide to do casual work, part-time work. You may decide to work for a company actually that you're really interested in. It's related to your degree or related to your interest or passion, but they may not have license to sponsor your visa, or they may have the license but they may not be willing to sponsor your visa. Okay, so you just have to think about how are you going to maximize this 2-year period. Okay, which brings me on to the kind of the final disadvantage, or the final con, is the visa is brilliant in so many ways, but if not used wisely, it could delay or harm your future career prospects. And kind of I'll explain a little bit about that. So firstly, if you decide to spend the 2 years in a casual job, working in retail, working in hospitality, not working in the target industry that you're really interested in, but you think, you know, I have this graduate route visa, I'm just going to take some casual work while I'm looking for a job, then you may end up, you know, still in that same casual job for 12 months or the full 2 years. And actually, that's going to affect your future career, because an employer is going to ask you, what have you been doing since you graduated? You know, and you need to have a good, convincing answer for them. Okay, so you really be careful about the type of role, the type of job that you take post-graduation, what your goals are. Another way it could harm your career prospects if you don't use that time wisely is if you go into a job or take on an internship or placement or whatever you like, and you end up there for 12 months, for example, and then you think, do you know, I actually really want to apply for a top graduate scheme at this big engineering company, for example. You just have to be careful again about explaining what you've been doing in the last 12 months, because often, and lots of international students aren't always aware of this, many UK graduate employers want to hire fresh graduates. So graduates who just completed their degree course, rather than graduates who have completed their degree course a year ago or 18 months ago. So fresh graduates are valuable for UK employers. They can take you on, they can train you to do the role. Some UK employers are really interested in students who just graduated. Okay. So these are just the things to think about when you're considering the advantages and the disadvantages of graduate routes. So just to sum up, here are a couple of questions I would love you to just consider and reflect upon. So first of all, what are your short and long-term goals? You may be sitting there thinking, actually, all I want after graduating is just to gain some experience. I just want to do an internship, or I just want to work for a couple of years. Then I want to return to my home country. Okay, and you're going to have this UK-based experience, you know, exposure to working here, the work culture, and all these amazing things will boost your CV and your work in your home country. And if that's the case, this visa is perfect, absolutely perfect. However, if your long-term goal is to stay in the UK for longer than 2 years, if your long-term goal is a career in the UK, you know, to build a bright career, to stay here, and maybe one day eventually get permanent residency, then this graduate route visa is not going to guarantee that. Okay, so it's really important that you consider what your goal is, and depending on what that is, how will this new visa help you achieve that? Okay, it's really, really key. So any questions around using the graduate route visa wisely, jobs with sponsorship, etc., please put them in the Q&A box, which I can see is getting very busy. Brilliant. So I will just talk very quickly before we start our Q&A. I just want to talk about the next steps. So if you would like individual advice on your visa situation, and there have been so many specific questions that have been asked throughout this webinar around your specific visa expiry date, your eligibility, you can email Talitha. She's kindly provided her email address, and you can book a one-to-one consultation with her around this. The second thing you can do is take the free online assessment offered by Grad Careers Coach. Essentially, this is a series of questions assessing what your chances are of securing a role with visa sponsorship in the UK. And what you'll get at the end is a very detailed feedback report and key areas that you need to work on.